ReliableSoft.net, a digital marketing agency, estimates that Google holds 81.5% of market shares of all the search engines readily available to the public. Obviously, Google is one of the most widely used providers of internet and service-related products, as you can see here in this graph. It is evident that while almost everyone with internet access uses Google, this in turn means that Google is able to obtain information off of any one of these users' cell phones. Recently, Google's location tracking data, known as Sensor Vault, has been utilized as a dragnet by law enforcement officials seeking location tied to specific users. Using geofence warrants, these law officials are able to acquire tracking IDs that identify anyone who's in the area of a crime scene given the estimated time of a transgression. This is a little overview of what Sensor Vault is. This releases private information about and pinpoints both guilty and innocent parties. I've done extensive research on both sides of this argument, and it is my belief that this is a violation of privacy on both Google's part and law enforcement officials. The use of this service in regards to forensic investigation has far-reaching implications, ethical dilemmas, and questions of legality. To start off with the far-reaching implications, it is undoubtedly clear that this path of investigation can be suggestive in who it incriminates. One's personal information could be put under scrutiny simply because they were in the wrong place at the wrong time. Jennifer Valentino DeVries, a New York Times investigative reporter, writes the story of a warehouse worker, Mr. Molina, who was arrested for murder after officials used geofence warrants and other circumstantial evidence pending his apprehension. He was later released after the guilty party was discovered, and it was the ex-boyfriend of Mr. Molina's mother who periodically used his car. This is a clear example of how Sensor Vault was misused and led to the indictment of an innocent man. When a user's phone is tagged with a tracking ID, this leads law enforcement to believe that they were around the crime scene when the crime was committed. But often, many criminal infractions are not reported until hours or even years later. The Bureau of Justice Statistics reports in a survey released in 2012, over 3.4 million crimes went unreported. I assume that this number has either grown or stayed the same as crime rates have fluctuated and the trend has slowly risen. Later, the Bureau interviewed many victims and witnesses that chose not to come forward and found the many reasons for their actionless behavior. This includes fear of repercussion, feelings that the crimes were not significant enough, or concern for the offender themselves. The more time that passes after a crime, the less coherent the recollection of the memory will be. Depending on the location and amount of security evidence or footage or lack thereof, they could be investigating a large time frame, meaning a large number of people. This could lead to false accusations and far-reaching claims being made. Now, it's understood that with the occasional false accusation, there have been some successes, which leads to the ethical dilemmas at hand. Can this indiscretion be justified by the good that it can bring? Because the rate of successful convictions is still unclear and cannot be put in the form of statistics, one cannot support the use of Sensor Vault as a law enforcement dragnet. Maybe it could be justified if there were additional facts and statistics providing evidence, but with no substantial benefits, there's too much risk in exploiting the trusting relationship built between Google and its stakeholders. Google has several stakeholders in its success: customers, employees, investigators, suppliers, the community, and the government. Google has a responsibility to uphold a direct and transparent relationship with each one of these stakeholders. Doing something inconsistent to this agreement would be unethical on Google's behalf. Asking them to betray this relationship with their customers is unethical on behalf of law enforcement officials. Let's first address the customer stake in this. In the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission's Code of Business Conduct and Ethics, they state, and I'm paraphrasing here, that businesses have a moral responsibility to interact with customers in an open and honest manner. Withholding information from customers about the usage of vital location data is not an open and honest interaction. Next, there are the employees, the investors, and the suppliers. Google's responsibility to them is to make wise business decisions that will result in financial profit, thus allowing these three parties to profit as well. And this could be in the form of wages, investments, or fees rendered respectively. If Google were to lose the trust and therefore the business of millions of users, their company value would plummet. Some may say that because Google is huge, its stability would make its downfall unlikely. And although that is a true statement, Google's vast reign over the technology world depends heavily on the fact that the users who utilize its service expect a relationship that is built on reliability and trust. If this trust were to fall through, many people would switch to other suppliers that weren't acting as informants to the feds. This brings us to Google's social responsibility to the community and to our government. Certainly removing as many criminals from the streets as possible is a positive thing to do for both our society and our government. But let's be honest, when businesses involve themselves in social responsibility, and this could include climate change, poverty, hunger, they're not acting out of pure altruism. They are looking for positive branding or public recognition because first and foremost, they are a business. Remus Serban, author of HubGets, a digital marketing agency, will tell you that the main objective for running a business is to maximize profits for owners and for stakeholders. Without this objective, the business would cease to exist altogether. This brings us to the legal concerns of this discussion. One counter-argument that needs to be addressed is the terms and conditions agreement that Google gives new users about location services. Some argue that customers should expect their information to be used when they sign this contract. It explicitly states in Google's privacy and terms that the purpose of location tracking is to provide useful, meaningful experience, and that is the core of what Google does. The location information plays an important role in doing just that. They then go on to mention restaurant locations, GPS services, and accurate search reliability as examples of these meaningful experiences that they mention in this terms and agreement contract. But nowhere in these terms does it say that by allowing Google to see the history of your locations, you could implicate yourself in a crime or a federal investigation. In addition to the vague terms and agreements service, there is also the issue of Fourth Amendment violations. The Fourth Amendment, summed up, protects citizens from unreasonable searches and seizures without a probable cause. Upon searching one's private property, law enforcement officials must abide by something called the knock and announce rule. Cornell law describes this injunction when stating, a police officer executing a search warrant generally must not immediately force his or her way into a residence. Instead, the officer must first knock, identify himself or herself and their intent. Then they must wait a reasonable amount of time for the occupants to let them inside the residence. One of the prides the United States has is that it allows this freedom of private property, and it's respectful about barging into someone's home without knocking first. But who's to say that invading the privacy of a person's phone is not the same as coming unannounced into their home? The fact is, there's a fine line. The fine line between what is private property and what is not should not be manipulated at the convenience of law enforcement officials. The knock and announce rule should be upheld in any search warrant scenario, whether this is homes, cars, or cellular devices. To close, I believe that Google should not share SensorWell data to law enforcement officials due to far-reaching implications, ethical dilemmas, and questions of legality. If it had a higher success rate or concrete statistics to back it up, I could consider revisiting the situation down the road. But for now, law enforcement should either present the warrant to the suspect at hand or find an alternative route. As Google stocks continue to trend upward, according to MarketWatch, which is an investor tracking website produced by the Dow Jones Company, and you can see it right here. Their stocks are trending upwards. And I think it would be a shame if anything were to jeopardize Google's position as the most prominent multinational technology company in the world. It is important to uphold the law and do your part as a citizen, but to do so in an unethical way cannot be justified. In the words of American politician and jurist Earl Warren, in civilized life, law floats in a sea of ethics.